Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege of Parshas Vaeyra. And with this parsha, we are introduced to the narrative of the Makos, the plagues. And it's interesting to note how much time the Torah spends on the plagues. The Torah could have just told us there were 10 plagues, right? Or there were punishments against the Egyptians. But the Torah chooses to go through each of the plagues one by one with a fair amount of description for each, some more, some less. But we emerge from the parsha with a very real understanding of these Makos, which then leads the Mefarshim and the commentaries to understand that these Makos, these plagues, were much more than simple punitive retribution for 210 years of barbaric treatment of the Jewish people. These Makos were much more than just punishments, but embedded in these punishments, embedded in these punitive measures, was a message, was a lesson. And in fact, Mefarshim bring down, the commentaries explain that these Makos really had two messages. Each Makkah, each plague had a message for the Egyptians, and each Makkah also had a message for the fledgling Jewish nation. So when we go through each Makkah, which we're not going to do, when you go through each Makkah, there are these two side-by-side lessons. Punitive, yes. Punishment, yes. Because at the end of the day, it was also important for Egypt and for the Jewish people to see that there is din and there's a dayan, there is judgment, there is a judge, there is retribution for when you mistreat or when you hurt people. It was important for the Jewish people to see this. It was important for Egypt to see this. But as you begin to go through the Makos, you see something amazing. So for example, the Medrash brings down that the first two Makos of Dam and Sardeya, blood and frogs, interestingly enough, both centered on the Nile. And so amazingly enough, the Medrash brings down, the Medrash explains that the Egyptians worshipped the Nile. In fact, again, the Medrash writes, Lefisha Ikar Yishuv Eretz Mitzrayim Haya Nilus. Now, what's interesting is the Egyptians worshipped the Nile because it was the Nile that ultimately provided all of the water for irrigation. So as such, it really was the Egyptian life source. So by HaKadosh Baruch Hu turning the Nile into blood and then afterwards bringing frogs out from the Nile, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was demonstrating his dominion over their deity. Dominion over their deity. Almost HaKadosh Baruch Hu asserting out of the gate religious, theological, spiritual superiority over the Egyptian god. Incredible. But it begs the question. I understand why you need to give a message about the Nile. That's blood, that's dam. By transforming water into blood, that by definition demonstrates that spiritual superiority. But why the need for frogs? Again, I understand also dominion over the Nile, because remember the frogs came out from the Nile. But there must be an additional message that's embedded in the Makkah of Sardeh and the Makkah of frogs that is something additional, in addition to the Makkah of Dam. Because remember, again, if it's just about asserting spiritual superiority over the deity of Egypt, you accomplished that, shkoyach, you did that with Dam. What's the message of the frogs? What's the message of the Tzvardeya? And I want to share with you something amazing. You know, in Perek Shira, which is a beautiful composition, written about the idea that all of nature sings to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All the entire natural world is necessary and purposeful. And the entire natural world, every animal, every species, every part of nature sings its own song to the Ribono Shel Olam. In fact, I remember as a child, that my mother told me that my grandmother, Zichron Livracha, used to say that, you know, when it's windy and the trees are going back and forth, my grandmother, Zichron Livracha, would tell my mother, she live and be well, that was the trees davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything davens, everything praises, everything sings to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Perek Shira goes through the variety of different pieces of the animal kingdom, telling us what everybody sings. So listen to this. So in the introduction to Perek Shira, there is a fascinating exchange. Listen to this. David HaMelech, B'shar shesiyim sefer Tehillim, zachar daito alov. When David HaMelech finished composing Sefer Tehillim, which of course is a monumental accomplishment, so David HaMelech was feeling very proud of himself. Va'amar lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam. So David says, Hashem, Yesh bria shebarasa ba'olamcha, she'omeres shiros v'sishpachos yoser mimeni. So David HaMelech says something pretty amazing. He says, God, I would venture to say that there is no creation in your entire world who sings to you, who composes such beautiful odes and songs like I do. Is there anything else in this world that sings to you like I do? So and David HaMelech said the Sefer Tehillim. Sefer Tehillim is the most magical and beautiful and incredible and overwhelming and holy composition. So David HaMelech is not gloating. He's not being arrogant. He's saying, Ribono Shel Olam, I think I might be the creature in this world who sings to you more than anything or anyone else. Listen to what the Medrash says. The Hakdama, the introduction to Parak Shira. Bosa Shah, Nizdamna Lo Tzvadei Achos. In that moment, a frog jumped over. Frog came over. V'amurlo David, al tazuach daita ha'alacha. David, don't get so. This is the frog talking to David HaMelech, whatever this means. And the frog says, David, don't get so carried away with yourself. Shani omeres shiros v'sishbachos yoser mimeka. David, I sing greater songs. I say greater praise to God than you. Incredible. So the frog says, calm down, don't get so full of yourself. I'm greater than you. I sing more than you. I do more than you. Not only that, he goes on, he says, V'lo'od ela shani osakes b'mitzvah gidola. The frog says, David, you should just know, I do something even greater than singing to God. What's greater than singing to God? V'zohi mitzvah shani osekes ba. This is a mitzvah that I'm always engaged in. Yesh b'sfas hayam min echad she'ein parnasaso kimin amayim. There's a particular species, a sea creature, that feeds on other animals in the sea. But when this sea creature can't find anything else to eat in the sea, and is hungry and is in danger of expiring, notleni va'ochleni, I, the frog, make myself available at the seashore, and this creature comes out, eats me, and so is sustained. Zohi mitzvah. This is the primary mitzvah that I am engaged in. A dramatic medrash. It's not even a medrash. The introduction to Parak Shira. David HaMelech, all excited about his Sefer Tehillim. The frog saying two things. Number one, I sing more than you. I sing greater songs than you. But in addition to that, I do even a greater mitzvah. Sea creature, when it gets hungry, can't find anything to eat in the sea, comes and eats me. What's the pshat? So obviously, what does this mean? What is it that's trying to be conveyed to us? So it's interesting, by the way, about frogs. Frogs occupy, an important place in the food chain. On one hand, frogs are incredibly important as they consume certain harmful insects. But on the other hand, frogs are also the primary source of nutrition for many birds, snakes, and other animals. So the frog is a source of sustenance for so many. So perhaps what's happening over here is as follows. That the frog is saying to David, you're getting you're happy, you're proud of yourself with your beautiful accomplishment, which is exceptional, and that is incredible. There's nothing Sefer Tehillim. But the frog is saying, David, I do something greater than singing. I do something greater than your Sefer Tehillim, and that's what? That's enabling others to be great as well. The frog is teaching David HaMelech that sometimes the metric of success in life is not what you do for yourself, but it's what you do for someone else. See, we so often measure accomplishment through what I'm able to do. How accomplished am I? And by the way, I don't mean in an arrogant way. I just mean in general. What have I been able to do with my life? How could I impact? How could I self-actualize? What can I do? But it's very centered on me and my accomplishments. And that's what David HaMelech was focusing on. Look at what I've done. And comes along the frog, and the frog says, I'm engaged in the biggest mitzvah in the world. Now, granted, this is a bit dramatic, giving himself over to the sea creature as a source of nourishment. But it's a lesson that sometimes the greatest thing you do in life is not what you do for yourself, but it's the growth that you enable in other people. And perhaps this was the message of Tzvardeya. That's the message of the frog. That whereas blood is there to teach us, so to assert spiritual and theological superiority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu over the deities of Egypt, frogs was something else. The Makkah of Tzvardeya was there to teach the fledgling Jewish nation that life is not about what you could do for yourself, but rather the greatest accomplishment in life is what you could do for the other. And understand how important this lesson was. Klal Yisrael was going to experience shortly emancipation. And it would be normal to think that a slave, what does a slave want to do when he or she is emancipated? They want to eat, they want to be secure, they want to have themselves. It could easily become a very self-centered and egocentric life. an existence. Because after all, for 210 years we were oppressed. For 210 years no one looked out for me. For 210 years I was all on my own. Now I'm finally free. I have to take care of me. Now that I'm free, I have to take care of me. And so Makkah number one is to assert the fact that Kadosh Baruch Hu reigns supreme. And his theological monarchical identity is not challenged by anyone or anything. But lesson number two, don't live life for yourself. The greatest things you accomplish, not the things you do for yourself. It's the greatness and the goodness and the beauty that you bring out in others. But the truth is, we've already been taught this lesson even a little bit earlier. In last week's parsha, we were introduced to Shifra and Tepuah, who Rashi tells us were in fact Yocheved and Miriam. I said, if it was Yocheved and Miriam, then why not use their names Yocheved and Miriam? So Rashi points out that Shifra, Yocheved, Shemishaper says a lot. They were midwives, and when the baby would come out, so Yocheved would clean up the baby. That's the lashon of Shifra, Shemishaper. She would beautify the baby, and Miriam was Puah. What's Puah? Shepoah. She would coo with the baby to make the baby happy, to make the baby giggle. So these were their names, their descriptive names. And asked the Lubavitch Rebbe a very simple question. Miriam and Yocheved, right? Yocheved and Miriam were their birth names. Shifra and Puah were their descriptive names. Why doesn't the Torah introduce us to these two great matriarchs with their actual birth names? Why introduce them to us with their descriptive names, with their midwife names? In other words, tell us, there's Yocheved and Miriam, and then, by the way, they were also known as Shifra and Puah. Tell us that. Why using their non-primary names and only ultimately using their midwife descriptive names? And the Rebbe says something so beautiful. Because sometimes the greatest name that you acquire for yourself in life is not the one you're given at birth, but it's the name that you earn through doing for others. You see, Miriam and Yocheved and Miriam, mother and daughter, those are the names that they were given by their parents for whatever the reasons. And that's beautiful and that's incredible. And the name contains so much holiness. But Shifra and Puah, those are the names that represent what they did for someone else. Those are the names that represent what they did for these newborns, for these mothers, and especially after the Gezeirah, after the decree of Paro. Throw all the babies, throw all the boys into the Nile. These two women refused to bow. They refused to give in. They refused to cave. And they kept on helping those births, taking care of those newborns, taking care of those new mothers. Shifra and Puah represent what they did for others. And sometimes what you do for someone else, that's what solidifies and concretizes your identity. Your birth name is very nice. Someone else gave that to you. And obviously it's powerful and it's holy and it contains much Kedusha. But your real identity, that's forged in what you're willing to do for the other. That's forged in the greatness that you enable in the other. And so you see something amazing. Yocheved and Miriam, Shifra, Puah, the Tzvardeya, the frogs, all teaching us this core and central lesson. That sometimes the greatest accomplishments in life are not what you do for yourself, but it's the growth, the greatness that you are able to enable in the other. Sometimes the greatest things in life are not our own personalistic accomplishments, but rather, again, it's what we're able to do for someone else. We have to accomplish as individuals, but as much as we want to become personalistically great, we must always be a Shifra and a Puah. We must always be a Tzvardeya and look how we can do for others and how we can bring out the greatness in others as well. Wishing everyone a good night of Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.